I used to be a professor. Just a regular, underpaid, overworked, mid-level faculty member at a small state university. My field was applied physics, electromagnetism, material science, the kind of stuff that usually lands you in a lab with grant proposals, not in the middle of, whatever the hell this is. It started about 8 months ago. 2 men in suits showed up outside my office after my last lecture of the semester. They didn't look like recruiters, didn't look like cops either. Too quiet. Too still. One of them slipped a folded letter onto my desk while the other locked the door behind us. The letter was an offer, no, more like a command dressed up as an opportunity. They'd been following my work. They needed me for a government research position. Classified. Relocation required. They made a point of telling me the pay was more than I'd see in 20 years at the university, plus clearance that would put me above the pay grade of most generals. I asked what kind of research it was. They said it was aeronautical materials, but their eyes didn't match their words. You know when someone rehearses a line and spits it out like a script? That's what it sounded like. I should have said no. I should have laughed in their faces, torn the letter, and called security. But there was something in the way they looked at me. Like the decision was already made, and my choice was just a polite formality. I signed. And that was the last normal day of my life. The transport van picked me up at 3:17 a.m. sharp. They didn't tell me the time, they just said, be ready. I was. I hadn't slept anyway. The driver didn't speak, just nodded when I stepped in. 2 others were already inside, faces I didn't recognize. They sat with their hands on their knees, staring straight ahead, like mannequins. I tried to make small talk, but neither of them so much as blinked. About 15 minutes into the ride, one of the suited men pulled a black cloth from his pocket. Protocol, he said, before slipping it over my eyes. I expected darkness. Instead, it was suffocating. The fabric smelled faintly metallic, like it had been soaked in something chemical. My breathing felt too loud inside it. We drove for what felt like hours. I tried to count turns, bumps, elevation changes. I lost track. My sense of direction was shredded. By the time they pulled me out, I was dizzy and nauseous. When the blindfold came off, I wasn't outside. I was already deep inside the facility. Bright white lights overhead, the kind that hum faintly, like a swarm of insects trapped in the ceiling. The air was sterile, unnaturally cold, and carried no smell at all, like someone had scrubbed every trace of humanity out of it. The first thing I saw was the security. Guards in gray uniforms with no insignia. Heavy rifles, heavier stairs. Behind them, the walls, brushed steel, seamless, like they'd been poured instead of built. No windows. No clocks. Just corridors stretching in unnatural, deliberate angles that felt wrong in ways I couldn't put into words. I asked where I was. Nobody answered. That was the moment I realized I hadn't been hired. I'd been taken. They brought me to a lab that looked like something out of a dream. Or maybe a nightmare. Everything was too clean, too polished, like a showroom version of a laboratory rather than one where people actually worked. The tables gleamed, the equipment looked new but unfamiliar, and the computers had interfaces I couldn't recognize. Not Linux, not Windows, not anything I'd seen before. A woman in a white coat, badge clipped to her collar with no name, handed me a folder. "You'll begin here," she said. Her voice was flat, rehearsed, like a flight attendant reading instructions she'd repeated too many times. Inside the folder were sketches, photographs, and notes, none of it made sense. The photos were of something biological, but not right. Tissue samples that glistened in impossible colors, cells with structures that shouldn't exist under any microscope. Some of the sketches showed cross-sections of bones that curved back into themselves, fractal patterns in flesh that looked engineered, not grown. They told me I'd be helping them understand the properties of recovered material. They didn't call it alien. Nobody ever said that word. Instead, they used phrases like non-terrestrial origin or unconventional specimens. But I could see it in their faces, the way their eyes avoided mine whenever I asked a direct question. The assignment was simple: measure electromagnetic responses in these samples. Test how they reacted to different frequencies, different fields. Easy enough in theory. Except, none of the instruments behaved the way they should when the material was involved. Sometimes the readings would spike into nonsense, negative values where no negative values should exist. Other times the equipment would just die, fuses blown, batteries drained in seconds, screens flickering with static like old televisions. Once, the lights overhead dimmed the moment I touched the sample with a probe. I asked if it was safe. The woman in the coat just smiled and said, "That's what you're here to determine." They told me we were moving from observation to interaction. Up until then, I'd only been running tests on scraps, slivers of tissue in glass containers. But now they wanted me in the containment wing. Containment. Just the word made my gut twist. We passed through 5 different security doors to get there, each one thicker than the last. At the final checkpoint, I noticed something scratched into the metal frame of the door, like someone had dug it out with a key. Don't listen. Inside, the air was heavier, buzzing faintly like static in my teeth. The chamber wasn't huge, just a reinforced room with observation glass, banks of equipment, and in the center, a containment tank filled with some kind of viscous fluid. Floating inside was it. I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't an organism, not in the sense I'd ever studied. It was more like a shape, constantly shifting, like geometry having a seizure. Limbs, or maybe tendrils, appeared and dissolved back into its body. Its surface shimmered in a way that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. The assignment was to introduce an electromagnetic field and record the reaction. The moment we powered the generator, the glass fogged over from the inside. Something slammed against it, loud enough to rattle the floor. I swear I saw a hand, 5 long fingers splayed against the glass, before it melted back into shifting mass. Then came the sound. Not out loud, not exactly. More like a pressure behind my eyes, a vibration crawling down my spine. Words that weren't words, half whispers, half static. I couldn't understand them, but I knew, they were directed at me. The readings went insane. Instruments screamed with numbers that didn't exist, monitors flashed symbols I'd never seen. And then the alarms kicked in, shrill, repeating, too late. The glass cracked. Something moved. And everyone started screaming. The moment the glass cracked, everything collapsed into chaos. Sirens blared, red lights strobed, and guards shouted into radios while dragging people toward the exits. The thing didn't break out, it just slipped through, its form flickering across the room faster than my eyes could track. Bullets dropped to the floor like toys. They never let me go. They locked me in a windowless room, slid food through a hatch, and handed me new assignments like nothing had happened. No explanations. No mention of the people who vanished. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became, I wasn't there for my research. I was bait. They wanted it to notice me. And it did. Now I hear my name whispered in static, in the silence before sleep, in the hum of dead electronics. If they ever come to recruit you, run. You're not a candidate. You're disposable.